There's a new dev diary for EU5, and in it there are some big economic changes and nerfs that I want to go over. So let's begin. Let's start at the top with urban rights. These are going to be a way to specialize urban locations towards certain goals. For example, as we can see in the screenshot here, the cloth industry, which increases the level of cloth buildings in the location, as well as a stable port urban right, as mentioned in the text, or one that encourages migration and merchant growth. On the surface, I don't really like this addition. Not necessarily because I think it's bad, but it sounds rather tedious, and the sort of busy work I think should be avoided. The idea of having to go around to each of your urban cities and towns and potentially apply this modifier doesn't really sound like something I'd like to do, so it's probably something I won't do. And the fact the only real cost for this is mana, in this case 5 legitimacy, Republican tradition, etc., means that there's no real reason not to hand these out. You can see that in this example we have a slight production efficiency malus from applying it, but honestly, I doubt that production malus is enough to counteract the positives. For example, building an extra 5 levels of both cloth guilds and fine cloth guilds would easily counteract that minus 5%. Meaning if you're not really applying these, you're setting yourself back a bit. But as I said, it really just feels like more tedious, busy work that I don't really think the economy needed more of. It feels like the sort of thing that should happen naturally as time goes on. If you build a lot of cloth buildings in a location, for example, surely it should become a center of cloth manufacturing organically without you having to slap a modifier on it. But we'll have to see. Maybe I'm exaggerating the tedium of handing it out. We can see that there's going to be a window here to hand them out. Hopefully there's a way to do it on a larger scale. But as I said, it feels like the sort of thing where you're just going to want to throw these down everywhere with not much reason to not do them, unless they buff this malus to production efficiency or add some other malus together with it to make it so you don't want to put them literally everywhere. Moving on to trade orders, I like this. I think everyone will like this. Trade orders let you tell the AI exactly what goods to import or export from a market without micromanaging individual trade routes. This is going to be a real boon if it works as intended, especially if it's very easy to do. They show here in the example that the UI will show the goods that are in highest demand that aren't available in the market, so you can quickly and easily just click them, which should be very helpful in keeping pops happy when they want a certain good and it's not in your market and you don't have to make tedious trade routes to try and get the good into the market. Just being able to tell the AI to do it will be very helpful and a great change in my view. Moving on to Megalopolises, I'm not sure how I feel about this. Do we really need another level of urban location? Once these are added to the game, we're going to have one kind of rural location and 3 kinds of urban locations. And the AI already tends to spam towns and cities everywhere it can. Hopefully they won't be able to spam these because you'll need 400,000 inhabitants and it will have to be your capital before they can be created. In a way, it might actually be very difficult for the AI to actually create them, which might be for the best, honestly. It honestly feels like Megalopolises were added into the game simply so they could turn Constantinople into one, which is fair, I guess. And I suppose it's a bit of a buff to building tool, which I think tool builders will of course like. We'll have to see how it ends up working out. As you can see, it massively decreases the amount of RGO you can have in a province. It also increases the movement speed. As you can see, it massively decreases the amount of RGO you can have in the location, while adding support for an extra 200 building levels, and also decreases movement speed for armies going through. We'll have to see whether this food production malus actually ends up mattering. As it currently stands, food doesn't really matter. If they could make food matter, these might be a little more balanced, but if not, I don't see a reason why you wouldn't want to build one of these in your capital. We'll have to see. Moving on to the court cost changes, this is a pretty big nerf to inflation, but to start with, you're now going to be anchored to a 10% of your economic base for your court costs, and you won't be able to decrease it to 0 like you can in the current version, where you can just stop paying for your court costs. And then modifiers, advances, government reforms, laws, and inflation will then affect the percentage, either upward or downward. They also mention that inflation is going to be one of the more punishing contributors, scaling court costs upward alongside diplomatic spending and fort maintenance. In the current version of the game, it's kind of beneficial to just let inflation run away from you because it doesn't increase your existing costs. It only increases the costs of doing things, like building buildings creating armies, appointing members to your cabinet. So I think this is a good change just to stop players just massively increasing inflation without any costs by tying inflation to your expenses and increasing those expenses. It's definitely a big nerf for inflation maxing now though. They also mentioned that you're never going to be able to decrease the cost of your court to below 10%. So it's very much going to be more of a trying to keep it at that 10% overall. We can also see that there's going to be a bit of a nerf to aristocracy. As we can see here, the percentage cost to your court is being increased quite a lot by aristocracy here, by 18%. We don't know what the value is currently at in this screenshot. It could be close to max, in which case we can say that the max will be 20%. When it comes to buildings, colonizing nations will gain access to a colonial administrator in their overseas territories, which convert distant possessions into genuine trade assets. We don't really know what that means. Is it going to be something like trade companies in EU4, where it's going to massively increase the value of the location? Will it increase control? We just don't know. We'll have to wait and see. We're also gaining access to a new line of urban buildings, this local council that we can see here, which increases local and max control in the location. Can only be built in urban locations though. It's already quite easy to increase control in towns and cities, so I'm not sure how big of an impact this will have. I suppose we'll just have to see. One thing they've mentioned here that is very important though, war is now going to lead to buildings being torched. Select buildings. I'm curious to know what buildings will be able to be torched and whether the player, will have any input. For example, can you siege down and then destroy forts? I doubt it. It wouldn't make much sense. But things like local governors, bailiffs, other trade buildings or infrastructure buildings make sense for torching and will make being occupied by enemy armies or rebelling population a lot more costly. It might actually encourage a bit of a fort spamming everywhere just to avoid the consequences of letting provinces be sieged down. They're already kind of negative, but if buildings can be demolished, it's going to be a lot worse. Now we move on to the expanding RGOs change. I don't really like this one. I'll explain why. They're going to make it so that the price of expanding an RGO is based on the demand for the good, which to me doesn't really make any sense. The idea that people want gold, so expanding gold RGOs is expensive is kind of silly. Building more and deeper mines wasn't expensive because people wanted gold, it was expensive because building mines is expensive. I understand why they've done this. They want to discourage you just investing in very high value trade goods like gold, like silver. Because of the cost of doing so, they want to encourage you to invest in other goods, which will be much cheaper to invest in. But as I said, I don't really like the change. If it were me, I would either do one of two things. I would either make it so expanding RGOs become more and more expensive as the level increases. For example, increasing from 1 to 2 should be a lot cheaper than increasing from 1 to 20, right? Another way they could do it is with diminishing returns. Digging deeper and deeper mines in order to extract more gold in real life led to diminishing returns, as there's only so much gold in the ground, right? Eventually just digging deeper just didn't lead to more gold. So some sort of diminishing return for RGOs would make sense. There's only, as I said, there's only so many trees you can cut down with your lumber RGOs. There's only so much gold you can find in your gold mines. There's only so many fields you have that you can grow wheat in. But I think just slapping a cost on the RGO just because it's a valuable good is kind of nonsensical. As I said, I understand why they're doing it, but it just doesn't make sense from a real world example. It's also going to lead to a complete rebalancing of the early game economy, which I'm sure will upset quite a few people. Moving on to the starting world, this is a great change. Now, at the start of the game, a lot of buildings are already going to be built. A lot of economic infrastructure is already going to be created at the start of the game. Florence is going to start as the fourth and dyeing capital of Europe. Venice will dominate the glass and naval production. This is a great change. It very much feels like the world is a sandbox when you start the game, with no real identity before the game started. So making the locations in the world reflect the real world will help give some personality to the various nations without you having to build up the entire economy from scratch. The states are also going to have a lot of their buildings already built at the start, which is again a good change. It never made sense that the nobility suddenly have to build all their toll castles and the peasants suddenly have to build all their farming villages when they really should exist before the game starts. So a good change overall in my thoughts. It also might do a good job of buffing the early game economy for players, because you won't need to rush to build all these darting villages and other things if they're already built at the beginning, which should remove some of the more tedium of having to do essentially the same sort of building up every game. We'll have to see though. We also get some good changes. Gold is being nerfed from 10 to 8 ducats, silver from 8 to 6, and the mighty elephant nerfed from 10 to 5. As I mentioned earlier, a real attempt to nerf the higher value trade goods and encourage you to invest in those lower value trade goods instead. There is going to be a bit of a buff though. Glass has been buffed from 2 to 3, and nobles, burghers, clerics now actively demand it, making glasswork a more viable industry rather than a niche luxury curiosity. Books have also been nerfed down from 5 to 3, putting a dent in the book economy. Raw materials are also going to become cheaper to move. Iron, copper, tin, lead, lumber are having their cost of transport half from 2 to 1, and stone dropped from 5 to 2, which should help with spreading these materials around. Unemployed peasants are now also going to contribute to materials with a slight, very slight increase to production per unemployed peasant. This can be exploited a little bit, I think. For example, one of the strategies is to forcibly migrate a lot of your population into high RGO provinces. So we can do something similar to that here, where we can force population to move toward the stone, clay, sand, and lumber locations, which will lead to increased productivity. We'll have to see whether it ends up being worth it. They also mentioned that the demand for trade goods is now going to change based on the age. By the age of revolutions, demand for all 5 goods are roughly doubled or tripled from their medieval baselines. It kind of feels like in the current game, you don't really need to bother with those higher, more valuable goods from the Americas. You don't need to worry about tobacco, coffee, or tea from Asia. But if they suddenly become very valuable as the ages go by, it'll make pivoting towards them a lot more viable. And the age tooltip will now show demand, which is going to be very helpful, so you can kind of plan ahead. We also get a new trade good tab in the location view. You're going to be able to just click on a location and see the goods that are being produced, the demand for them, the profit from them. A really nice change, a really nice quality of life change. The population system is also being completely revamped. Now pops are going to be able to grow on their own. In the current version, only peasants can grow. Only peasants can be born. The only way for other pops to be created is for peasants to promote into them. But now each pop is going to have its own organic growth rate, meaning peasants, burghers, nobles, clerics, and tribespeople all reproduce and expand naturally over time. Except for slaves for some reason. Slaves can't breed. I suppose we'll see if that actually stays in place, or whether slaves produce peasants. It seems like the sort of thing laws should be in control of, whether the children of slaves are also slaves or become peasants. We'll have to see. Because pops now grow organically, promotion has been drastically scaled back, which shouldn't be a surprise. Promotion, it feels like, has been nerfed since the game was released, and now it's going to be even less valuable if people can just be born into these stratas. It's also going to lead to a bit of a nerf to the economy, depending on how fast population's born and how fast promotion is reduced. They mention here you won't see peasantry rapidly converting into burghers simply because you built a market. We'll have to see how bad of a nerf it is. Speaking of burghers, they also mention that burghers are now having their political power doubled, while having the amount of burghers that staff locations halved, or roughly halved. It does feel like there are quite a few too many burghers in the current version of the game, so it makes sense. Overall, this should lead to there being less burghers, but them being more powerful, and you not being able to rush to a massive burgher economy right at the start of the game. They've also connected labour markets more directly to social mobility. When there is a surplus of work, more jobs available than workers to fill them, enfranchisement can now increase by up to 20%, reflecting historical realities that labour scarcity gave common people leverage to demand rights and freedom. We'll have to see whether this is actually a big change, or whether it's just a very minor buff to enfranchisement. They also mention that food consumption modifiers are now correctly wired into the food shortage system. We'll have to see whether this does lead to food being more scarce and in need of management. I'm not holding my breath though, but I guess we'll have to see. The trade system has also been completely overhauled. To start with, there's no longer going to be a hard block at trading at certain distances, but instead, trading from far away will have scaling costs based on the distance, meaning you can now get that incense that you need for your pest houses when the plague hits. It's just going to be rather costly. Maritime presence gets a buff, being able to directly reduce costs. based on the power of your maritime presence along the route. We can see here in this example screenshot of Venice importing elephants from Delhi, something you can't do in the current version of the game, at least not at the start. So I definitely think this is a better way to handle trade. It always feels strange that you're just a little too far away so you can't trade. So just adding costs to trade and then incentivizing maritime presence increasing to reduce trade costs feels like a great change in my view. Definitely encourages a more maritime presence focused playstyle. To add on to that, subjects are now going to share or provide maritime presence to their overlord as well as themselves. This is a big buff to any nation that uses colonies, really, because one of the things that's annoying about colonies is you don't really have any maritime presence in your colonies unless you send your navy all the way to America to increase it. But now you're going to gain maritime presence based on your vassals' maritime presence in the locations. So you're not going to need to send your navy literally everywhere to increase it. And your vassals are logically going to increase your trade power globally in the regions they control and have their navies in, which is another great change as it strengthens colonizing, which is quite weak, I feel, at the moment. The cost of colonizing far outstrip the benefits unless you invest quite a lot. So this will definitely help with the trade aspect of colonizing to make it more valuable. They also mentioned that quite a few bugs have been fixed. Trade automation had reliability problems where orders were being incorrectly cancelled or not created at all, which hopefully has been fixed. They also mentioned there was a bug where the precious minerals export ban accidentally blocked legitimate domestic intermarket transfers, which could be quite catastrophic to very heavily gold-focused nations. So it's good to see that's been fixed. The local good tooltip now also provides insight into how much of a good the POP can afford. As we can see in this example, labourers, soldiers, peasants can afford 0 of this cloth. Apparently 1.87% of slaves can afford it though. Finally, they mentioned that there have been some AI changes to make the AI behave more sensibly when it comes to the economy. AI rulers should now weigh their people's welfare when making trade decisions rather than chasing raw profits. Not sure that's historically accurate. And they've also apparently fixed a large amount of bugs, including 3 important changes. Temporary demand, added by events or other effects, are consumed last after everything else instead of first, so this does not cripple economies but instead drives up prices as intended. Secondly, while bankruptcy destroyed armies, deleted buildings and did other bad things to your country, it never touched any building queue you had. Now when you go bankrupt, your construction queues are erased. I assume that means both the construction queue for you and your estate's construction queue, which could be quite devastating. We'll have to see. And finally, only constructions at the top of the queue that could progress will add demand to their markets. All nice corrections to see. Next week, we're going to have some improvements to the military system, logistics, and some new concepts that we're bringing in for 1.2 and Fate of the Phoenix. Overall, a pretty good diary in my view. A lot of nice economic changes that should helpfully make the system better for not just the player, but also for the AI. As I mentioned, I'm not keen on the RGO changes, but you know, it's not that colossal of a deal. I'm more positive than I am negative about these changes. I think the nerf to inflation is a good idea. Inflation should be bad and should be something that should be avoided. Not sure how I feel about the next stage of cities, but I said it's unlikely we're going to see many of them anyway, so maybe it won't turn out to be a big deal. Johan also makes a few more posts, only 2 at the time of me reading this. In the bottom one, he mentions the AI is changing a bit when it comes to building cities everywhere, which hopefully will stop cities being built literally everywhere. A change I'd very much like to see. Personally, I'd like to see it restricted to 1, maybe 2 cities in a province. It feels weird to have a province with nothing but cities in. The other thing he's mentioned here, as you can see, he's got a few dislikes, is that they're not going to be making it so subjects don't assimilate cultures, saying that the cat is out of the box and players don't like it if they change it so vassals no longer assimilate culture. Personally, I don't really like the idea of it. He mentions he doesn't like the idea of it. He says subjects should not assimilate culture at all. And I kind of agree, because the whole point of a vassal is supposed to be an autonomous entity governing the local population that is made up of the local population. But as he says, cats out of the box, everyone loves using them. So it's unlikely we're going to see that changed for vassals, which is a little disappointing. Maybe the players need to change their views, and I do think vassals need to be nerfed quite a bit because they're way too powerful and there's no reason not to make them. Anyway, this is the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these changes. Are they good? Are they bad? Do you have your own ideas? I imagine a lot of people have their own ideas when it comes to the RGO expanding, so I'd love to hear them. But I said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.